To sort of play a game with your folks and kind of test their vulnerability in personal space. Maybe you've played this game before. You ask for the salt shaker, and after you use it, you just kind of set it a little closer to their plate. And then you ask for a dish of the green beans, and when you're done, you set it just a little closer to their plate. And if you're sneaky enough with it, they can end up completely frustrated that all the items on the table are in their personal bubble. Because now you've tested their vulnerability. That won't work for this. Remember, we play these games of Christian love, so don't put the soul shaker on their plate, right? That's fine. I'm not on. Yeah. Nope. I don't know.
You got
Nice. Relax there, you're going on. No, no, I come on. No.
No? Go ahead. You're loud now.
That was a compliment, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. There we go. Oliver Sacks, in his book, Anthropologist on Mars, talks about Dr. Bennett, who's a surgeon who suffers from Tourette's. I don't know if you are familiar with Tourette's, but Tourette's includes random cursing that's sort of uncontrollable and highly inappropriate. I'm not sure when cussing is appropriate, but Tourette's, it just kind of flies out. And it also includes a lot of sort of this herky-jerky, perpetual motion stuff that's also uncontrollable. Some folks with Tourette's, their refrigerator may be covered in dimples because they'll get hooked in a cycle of just pecking at it over and over and over again. It's a real sort of debilitating illness in many ways. It keeps them from having a driver's license sometimes and lots of other things in life. And did I mention that Dr. Bennett's a surgeon? He was serving in the Upper Plains states in an Indian reservation, had served there for years when Oliver Sacks went to sort of examine Dr. Bennett's unique case of Tourette's and how it related to the community. Two things he observed. One, whenever Dr. Bennett picked up a scalpel or any other sort of surgical device, his motions became increasingly fluid, smooth, and calm. Even more than that was the reaction of his patients. They never flinched. I mentioned he has Tourette's, right? If I saw a surgeon coming at me to do an outpatient procedure to whisk out a mole or something, and he's doing all this herky-jerky moving, I'm going to flinch when he comes at me with the scalpel. His patients do not. And he reflects on how this was a relationship of trust and vulnerability. Well, that's got a nice practice, right? We'll try that. An example of vulnerability is that. Oh, yeah. That's much better. Okay. Because as a patient, you can't get the healing unless you're vulnerable. Yes? Unless you will make yourself vulnerable to the doctor to use the scalpel, the needle, whatever they need to use on you. Unless you're vulnerable to that, the healing never has a chance. I have visceral reactions to communities of exclusion. Whether the exclusion or discrimination is based on race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or who your friend is or the color of your hair or the color of your eyes. I just have a deep aversion and reaction to those kinds of communities. And there's lots of reasons for that. So there's the sense of social cost, especially to those that are the outcasts. There's the logical arguments. There's the biblical mandate for inclusion. But I think underneath a lot of that is my foundational experience. My family is, well, they're not perfect, but they are awesome. And one of the many things they did right is when I was in my earliest years, most vulnerable states, they raised me to learn that vulnerability was good. Babies, when they're born, are completely vulnerable. They're completely dependent on you and I and everyone else. And so they get to learn at a very early age whether or not vulnerability is good or bad. In essence, their question is sort of, how is the world going to treat me in my perpetually vulnerable state? It's very different than the way we ask that question as adults. Infants don't really have a choice, but to learn a lesson that we have a choice to teach them. And how they learn that lesson forms them for a lifetime. As adults, we kind of ask it the other way around. We ask questions like, how am I going to treat a world that is vulnerable, or other people that are vulnerable? And more often than that, we ask the question, how can I not be vulnerable? How can I keep it all together? How can I be omnipotent 24/7? How can I have a stiff upper lip? How can I keep my chin up, pull my bootstraps up, rags to riches? How can I not show weakness? And we have great rationalizations. We say, I have to look strong because others depend on me. And if they see a crack in my armor or any sign of weakness, then it will make them less confident. It will ruin their day. They won't be able to count on me. We worry about being judged by others, so we bring that to the table. I can't show that I struggle with this, because if I show that I struggle with it, they're going to critique me, whoever they are in our life. I have to be strong all the time. Being an adult is hard. And it makes it very hard for the healing to come into our life, which is one of the reasons I love the passage that Shelley read today. It gives us so much to look at. In part, it gives us people to identify with. So we have 3 different characters that are dealing with Jesus in this story, and they each come to Jesus in different ways and give us options that maybe you identify with one of them more than the other one. Jairus is the desperate dad. He's also a leader type. He has resources at his disposal. He could have sent an emissary to go make an appointment with, he could have had his secretary call Jesus' secretary, and they could have set up an appointment to go see the doctor. He'd already done all that. He had exhausted those options. He's desperate. He is so desperate that as a leader of the community, well, he's kind of given up that time. He has come to Jesus in the midst of the public area and fallen to his knees and begged. Begging on your knees, that's not how most of us as adults want to be seen in public. But he's a desperate dad, and all the other options are gone, and that's how he comes to Jesus. That's how he becomes vulnerable to Jesus. On his knees, begging for his daughter's life. The woman with the bleeding for 12 years, she's not a leader. She's an outcast. Her bleeding illness has made her impure in the community's eyes and has affected her status. She doesn't have at her disposal the means that Jairus does. And even though she's gone to see all the doctors that she can see, she doesn't have a community that's going to care for her the way that Jairus' daughter is being cared for. And instead of coming in public and falling and begging at his feet, she's crossing lines of taboo. A woman talking to a man in public. She's trying to be anonymous. She's trying to be anonymous by reaching through the crowd to touch whatever she can grab onto. And then we have the girl. The girl who starts out sick and by the end of the story is dead. That's how she comes to Jesus. She doesn't do anything. I don't know which one of these 3 you identify with the most. Whichever one it is, there's something amazing that's happening that all 3 of these share that helps us to understand how Jesus works with us. None of these 3 earn Jesus' favor. That whole bit that we bring as adults, that I'm going to be strong and have my armor on and no one's going to see a crack, and I've got to be strong for my children or my employees or my neighbor. None of them are doing that kind of work to get Jesus' favor. None of them are saying the perfect prayer. None of them are having perfect attendance. Well, they might have perfect attendance in church. I don't know. I shouldn't judge them that way. But that's not what's got them the healing. They've all become vulnerable. Jairus, he becomes vulnerable by casting aside everything that he's tried and doing the only thing that's left, which is just falling at Jesus' feet and begging. That's how he becomes. This isn't a doing thing. It's becoming. It's claiming a relationship. It's becoming open to Jesus' love. And when he does that, that's when he experiences the healing. I think he experiences the healing almost instantly, because even though he's still worried about his daughter, we don't hear in the story Jairus urging him on. Yes, they start to journey back towards his daughter, but when Jesus stops and is distracted by the woman, we don't hear Jairus going, "Forget her, my daughter is this way." Jairus walks along beside Jesus, trusting. The woman, she becomes vulnerable by risking to reach across to be open. She reaches across these barriers of her impurity, her gender, her status in the community. She dares to reach out of her anonymity that had been her safeguard, right? Jairus' safeguard was, I'm leader of the synagogue, I'm a male in a male-dominated society, I'm the dad, I'm the one who provides. You get the list. Hers is the anonymity. I am going to be anonymous, because if I'm anonymous, no one will bother to hurt me. I don't have to risk. If no one sees me. Why do you think the back seat in a sanctuary is usually the most desired? How do we be anonymous before God? Right. She dared to reach out of her hiding place to be known. And the girl got up when she was called. To me, the girl may be the most amazing example, because even when you can do nothing to become vulnerable, when we're gone, when we're dead, even there, Jesus reaches out. Even there, Jesus reaches out to us and grabs us and loves us and heals us. While these three people are taking their own path towards vulnerability, Jesus is demonstrating his persistence to be in their life. We don't hear him bantering with Jairus. Well, you know, as a leader of the synagogue, did you always agree with me? Or did you do this? Or what do you think about that? Jesus just goes. Jesus seizes that crack in Jairus' armor and goes. When the woman tries to hide and be vulnerable, Jesus won't let her stay anonymous. He wants to know who it is. Even when the rest of the crowd laughs at him and says, "You'll never find her. There's too many people here." He's too persistent for that. When they laugh at him and say that the daughter's dead, he's too persistent. He won't allow that. Dr. Galloway is a preacher that shares a story about a businessman in his community, in his church. He said they were having a conversation one day because the businessman was having some trouble in his workplace. He owned the company and things weren't going well at the moment. And he just needed someone to talk it through, someone he could trust to bounce ideas off of. So they were having this conversation, and Dr. Galloway says the most fascinating point was at the end of the conversation. They get to the end of the conversation, and they sort of kind of work through the options, and the businessman has a good idea of what he's going to do next. But then they have the deeper conversation. The businessman reflects, when I was younger, and a new owner of this company, these kinds of obstacles would just lead me into despair, and I'd have sleepless nights, and it was distracting. He goes, now, I don't feel quite that way. He goes, I don't think it's just because I'm older and have more experience owning the company. He goes, I think it's because I spend more time in church and more time with Christians. And they're talking about his involvement in church, and finally the business owner laughs and says, you know, I think, honestly, I finally just started taking Jesus seriously. That was his moment of being vulnerable and open. How does the seed blossom? It lands in a crack in the hard, cold surface of the ground and finds there in the depth the moisture to blossom and bloom. Jesus is seeking you. Seeking those opportunities to step into your life and to show you this life-changing, life-assuring, life-promising love. Maybe the better question for us is not, what am I doing today to find Jesus, but what can I be to let Jesus in? What are walls that I throw up to keep Jesus out? What do I do that forces Jesus to be at a distance from me? Maybe that's the better question for us. And along the way, we can thank Jesus for being so persistent with his love.